Hello everyone, how's it going? And welcome to today's Wild Rift video. Yesterday we spoke about the items in Wild Rift and my opinions about how strong or weak some items are. And today we're going to be taking a look at the runes. We got the Keystone runes, we got the Domination, Inspiration, Precision, and Resolve tree to go through. We'll talk about the runes, we'll talk about what runes are strong, what runes you should completely ignore, because there are some runes that you should be completely ignoring in this game and never taking in any single game. But again, as a rune tier list, most of the time items and runes are very situational, but this is just kind of the general power of the runes and how many champions can actually use these runes when it comes to a game. First, we have the Keystone. The one thing I want to compare first up in terms of the Keystones is going to be the kind of Glacial Augment versus Aftershock. In my opinion, Glacial Augment, I think in most people's opinions, Glacial Augment is a lot stronger than Aftershock. Aftershock doesn't give you the crazy amount of resistances and damage as what it used to. It doesn't even really buff you up that much, to be honest with you. It buffs you up a little bit. I mean, you can see with Aftershock here, you gain some extra bonuses, depending on how much bonus armor and magic resist you have, and then you also deal a little bit of damage. But to be fair, it's not that great. Glacial Augment is so much better than Aftershock. The raise of slows that you can get around enemy champions, and the big thing that people actually don't know about is it actually reduces the enemy champions damage. So these rays that you can do, which are AoE as well, you can reduce the damage of multiple enemy champions. And you'll see Glacial Augment a lot on champions, even in the jungle. If you're playing champions like Nunu jungle, Maokai jungle, and Mumu jungle, you would probably think to yourself, Aftershock is a lot better option, but people still go for Glacial Augment just because of how much value it can give to yourself and also give to your team. Grasp the Undying, still the go-to rune really in the Baron lane, whether you're playing a tank or a bruiser. Grasp the Undying is an incredible rune. It just helps you a lot during the laning phase. It helps you sustain, it helps you stack up a bunch of health, and also it helps you do a little bit of extra damage. Again, it's even used on bruisers as well, as I mentioned. Champions like Set, for example, Camille, these champions that you would think normally go for Conqueror or Fleet Footwork or something like that, they still go for Grasp the Undying just because of how strong this rune is and how well it can scale into the mid and the late game. Lethal Tempo, I mean, I don't think there's any surprise that Lethal Tempo is up in the S tier. It's absolutely crazy how strong this rune is. Every single pretty much marksman goes for Lethal Tempo now. The extra attack range that you get at maximum stacks now, there was a bit of a change recently. You don't get as much attack speed, but that's completely fine. When you get maximum stacks of Lethal Tempo, it increases your attack range. And this is so incredibly important for AD carries to keep their distance, to stay away from enemy champions, whether it's bruisers or assassins. And it just allows you to attack from so far of a distance that it's very hard for the enemies to try and lock you down. So Lethal Tempo, by far one of the best runes in the game for the extra attack speed, but also the extra range that you get. Moving down into the A tier, the comparison between First Strike and Electrocute is actually very interesting. I think throughout this whole cycle of like patch 5.2 before we got into patch 5.3, there was like 2 or 3 buffs to Electrocute. And I think Electrocute is actually in a pretty decent spot. It scales quite well now into the mid and the late game. And the thing is that First Strike is normally the one that you want for scaling because you get the bonus damage. You also get the bonus gold as well every single time that you proc First Strike. But it can be a little bit difficult to proc First Strike. I would say as a comparison of, you know, if you have a decision whether you want to take First Strike or Electrocute, kind of look at your matchup. If you're in a mid lane and you're wondering whether to take First Strike or Electrocute, say for example you're playing someone like Fizz or someone like Echo, if you're against a ranged champion in the mid lane and you're playing one of these champions, you are never going to be proccing First Strike. By the time you dash in, you're never going to proc it because the enemy champions are always going to deal damage to you first before you can deal damage to them. So your First Strike kind of becomes completely useless. A way that you can use First Strike is in the jungle. In the jungle, you can gank any lane, you can surprise any lane as well, and you'll be able to proc First Strike in the jungle. However, Electrocute, a lot more reliable to go with, a lot more, I guess, damage overall because it's a lot more reliable, and just all you need to do is 3 separate attacks, 3 separate abilities, quick bit of burst damage, and then you can get away to safety. And also the cooldown got lowered as well. You know, it's only 13 seconds now in the late game, so it might seem like quite a long time, but with that quick burst damage that you can do with Electrocute to go in and out of fights, it's still an incredibly good rune to go for. Conqueror is still good as well. Conqueror still gets used on some AD carries, some bruisers. It's still a great rune to go overall. It's a great rune if you don't want to go for something like Grasping Undying. The extra healing, the extra damage that you get from Conqueror is just great at the moment. Arcane Comet, again, another rune that's been buffed quite a few times during this patch cycle. Being able to use the Comet, get that ability that hurls a comet, and it stacks over time as well. I think that's the big thing, is that it's stacking over time, so it's much more of a late game scaling rune, and the scaling is actually a lot better now since an update which happened about, I would say, a month or two ago now, where they increased how many stacks you get every single time that you hit an enemy. So you can see there you get 2 times the total hits on enemy champions. So you get 2 base now, and then it times it by total enemy champions hit. So if you hit enemies 50 times, you times that by 2, so you get 100 damage. And obviously it scales off your ability power, your bonus attack damage as well. So overall, it's really good. This rune is incredibly powerful for champions that can poke at range, or even champions that have some sort of summer mechanic like Heimerdinger or Zyra. I already briefly spoke about Aftershock. I don't think it's like incredibly bad, but Aftershock is just in a rough state just because of how strong Glacial Augment is. I think if Glacial Augment did get nerfed, which I do feel like it should be, then Aftershock can kind of come back into the meta. Phase Rush is a bit unique. There are some champions which run Phase Rush. I'm thinking of very unique champions like Xin, for example, Singed, Alistar maybe. It's champions that can deal quick amount of damage in a short amount of time, and can also benefit from the ability haste and the movement speed that you can get. Alistar, for example, is really easy because you hit your headbutt pulverize combo, use your third ability, that's your 3 instances of damage there. You get the extra movement speed to stay in range to actually auto attack and stun enemies with your third ability. Xin as well, you can jump in with your third ability, use your second ability, and then an auto attack. Again, that's 3 instances. You get your movement speed to stay in range to deal a bunch of damage. Other than that, there's not really any other champions that can go Phase Rush. Like I said, it's a very unique rune that is in a really, really tough spot at the moment. Fleet Footwork, this actually got buffed in this patch, which I think is a very interesting buff that gives you 100% attack speed when you proc Fleet Footwork. So your next attack after you proc Fleet Footwork gives you 100% attack speed. It's a decent change. People are probably thinking, oh, why do we need more attack speed? But it's actually kind of like an auto attack reset in a way. So you don't actually have to wait for your next auto attack. You just attack and then it instantly attacks straight away afterwards. So it's not actually giving you attack speed. It's giving you an auto attack reset. I'm thinking of like a few unique champions that this could actually be pretty good for. If you think of like Echo with his passive, for example, it could work really well. Fizz, if you can get the auto attack reset with your second ability, could be really good. I'm thinking of like stacking champions that can work well with auto attacks. Caitlyn could be pretty good to stack your headshot a bit often, and also just give you a bit more pressure in the early game, but lethal tempo is just better. And also Gwen, again, stacking your auto attacks increases your damage on your first ability. So again, another unique rune, which is okay, it's not that bad. And then Airy, the only time you ever really want to use Airy is on Enchanter supports, just to give your team extra shielding, give you a little bit of extra poke. Outside of Enchanter supports, this rune never gets used. It's just not strong enough for poking. In PC League, for example, it gets used on Kennen just for a lot of poking, a lot of damage, but there's just not that much damage in Airy in Wild Rift in comparison. And Empowerment, I mean, the only champion that really uses Empowerment is Lucian, and that's it. I mean, sometimes Kindred as well, but even Kindred, sometimes you can just go for Conqueror instead, and it will just scale to deal more damage. But yeah, Empowerment, not that great of a rune, very unique rune. Akshan is actually the only other one that I can think of that also runs Empowerment. Lucian and Akshan, they're pretty bad in meta at the moment, and it's because of Empowerment. Empowerment is not that strong at the moment, so yeah, should really consider buffing it. Into the Domination tree. As you can tell, there are not any runes in the S tier for the Domination tree. That's because, in my opinion, Domination tree is probably the worst tree that you can run right now. I don't think there are a lot of runes in this tree that actually give you a lot of benefit. The only time that I would really run the Domination tree is the secondary rune tree, which you only get to pick 1 rune. Which there are some runes that you can pick which are quite good, which I have on this tier list. But then there's some other runes that are maybe not as good. Maybe I put Ingenious Hunter a bit too low here, but it's only in very specific scenarios that you actually pick Ingenious Hunter. Sudden Impact is still pretty good after exiting a stealth or using a dash, leap, blink, or teleport effect, you gain armor pen and magic pen. Really good if you have any sort of dashes. It's really good on assassins as well. Kha'Zix and Evelyn. Obviously, Evelyn is invisible pretty much throughout the whole game. You come out of it, you get free 13 magic pen. Kha'Zix with the invisibility and also his leap, he gets free 13 armor pen. But the problem is that you don't want to take Domination as your main rune because the other runes are just not that good. You know, Sudden Impact is a good one, again, for assassins, and just in general, there are other champions that can go for it. Lucian, Callista as well, that has basically champions that have any sort of dashes, but you normally take this as a secondary rune, not as a main rune, because the other runes are just not that great. Eyeball Collector as well, you can stack this a lot throughout the game. Very, very strong. You just gain damage every time you get a takedown, which is quite nice. Again, a takedown doesn't have to be a kill, it can also be an assist. Scorch is okay for poke during the early game. The problem is it still doesn't scale that well into the mid and the late game. It's good if you're like a ranged champion against a melee champion in the mid lane. As I was mentioning before, you can use your abilities to poke them, deal that little bit of extra damage and get an advantage in early game, but it falls off really, really badly during the late game. Zombie Ward is probably actually pretty underrated at the moment, especially on carry supports. Carry supports now being able to get the extra damage now on wards means that you can kill wards much quicker, which means you can get the passive stacks, or you can get the stacks, sorry, on Zombie Ward much quicker. You can use your support item, you can roam around the map, kill some wards, and then gain a lot of extra either attack damage or ability power. So I think Zombie Ward is pretty decent. The problem is, Wild Rift is a game that not a lot of people actually use wards, so it's a bit tough. Empowered Attack actually gets used on quite a few champions. It's an okay spot. I think the damage is still not that high, but there are some champions which, like Ahri, for example, if you charm someone and if you're guaranteed to get that auto attack in, then it can be really good. Evelyn as well, another champion that if you, it's not charm, how would it lure them, I think it's called lure. But basically when the champion starts walking towards you, you get a free auto attack in. So that auto attack again will proc empower damage and do that extra bit of damage. But again, it's not great. It's not really bad. It's just in the middle. This is kind of the problem with the Domination tree. So in the first tree, you have Sudden Impact, which is really good. You have Scorch, and then you have Shield Bash, but no one actually uses Shield Bash. Or maybe Psychic Wave is also in that as well. In the second row, you have Cheap Shot, Mark of the Week, or Empowered Attack. All three of these runes are not great. I mean, Cheap Shot and Mark of the Week are just not that great. I mean, Cheap Shot's good if you have reliable sources of being able to impair the movements. So this is like knockups, stuns, slows, things like that. If you have that guaranteed, then it can be good, but most of the time it's not worth it. It's much better to go for another tree instead. Mark of the Week as well. You mark them, you deal extra damage. Yeah, it's okay. It's just not that great. Ingenious Hunter is in the last tree. You sometimes take this as a secondary rune. I'm thinking of champions like Brom, for example, that can go Redemption, Protector's Vow. Trying to think of other items that can benefit quite a lot from Ingenious Hunter. That's the kind of the two main ones that I can think of when playing Brom support. You can go with Ingenious Hunter. But again, very unique rune, not really that great in general. It just gives you item ability haze. So any item that has any sort of cooldown, it will reduce it. And then you have the D tier, Shield Bash, Psychic Wave. I mean, Shield Bash is completely useless. I mean, it's terrible how much damage that Shield Bash gives. I mean, if you take this, then you're already at a disadvantage, in my opinion. This is really bad. Same with Psychic Wave as well. Your abilities do more damage after you auto attack, or your auto attack does more damage after you do an ability, but the damage is basically non-existent. You don't really feel the damage at all with this rune. So Shield Bash and Psychic Wave are just really, really bad runes. Again, Domination tree, there's not really that many great runes in the first place. Now, Inspiration tree is kind of completely different. Inspiration tree is actually on the rise at the moment. I think Inspiration tree is kind of underrated, and it can actually be incredibly powerful. Transcendence, probably one of the best runes that you can take in the game, whether you're playing mid lane mages, enchanters, any sort of AP champions that use a lot of their abilities. Transcendence works great. Level 1, you gain 6 ability haste. Level 6, you gain 6 additional ability haste. And at level 11, when you use an ability, that ability will be reduced by 15%. Just gives you a ton of free ability haste. Really, really strong right now. Again, it's a no-brainer if you're playing like any sort of mid lane mage, or even playing as a support, you know, enchanter support. Even if you don't take inspiration as your main tree, you should always take this as your secondary tree. Now, one rune which is, I think, gonna be, I think is pretty crazy right now. I did a video on it a few days ago, but the combo between IXTALI, SEEDJAR, and Sweet Tooth. So Transcendence is in the second tree, Sweet Tooth is in the first tree, and IXTALI SEEDJAR is in the third tree. These three runes right now are really good in terms of just a standard rune tree as the main rune tree. And it's because, obviously, with Sweet Tooth, it increases your honey fruit healing by 20%, and also it gives you 15 gold. But with IXTALI SEEDJAR, you can pick up that honey fruit, and you can place it down again, giving you an extra 15 gold per honey fruit. Now, there's 3 honey fruits in Sweet Tooth, which in total gives you 45 gold. So if you have IXTALI SEEDJAR as well, you can get 90 gold basically every 45 seconds. And this can also be used on things like Blasting Cone, the lens as well, that you can get vision for your team, and also you get a bit of movement speed as well. Again, it's not really about giving you damage, but it's about helping you just in the long run. I think in total I got like between 700 to 800 gold in one game alone, and to be fair, I didn't even actually optimize it completely. But if you optimize this to the max, and if you're able to walk around, get as much honey fruits as possible, then you can actually get some crazy gold at the end. I've seen people get over 1,000 gold with this rune combo alone, so it can be very good. And again, you can pick up other seeds as well if you can't pick up the honey fruit. Hextech Flash Traption, even though they did nerf this, that the actual press on this item instead of the hold is a little bit nerfed, it's still very good overall. Really good on less mobile champions like Ashe and Varus, for example, but there are plenty out there. It can also be used for engage as well, engage supports. You can still use this in a bush that you're hidden and still hold this ability, and Hex Flash a longer distance allows you to get into range to use your abilities, use your combos, and use your crowd control. After these 4 runes, it kind of goes a little bit lower, to be fair. Mana Flow Band is okay if you need the extra mana, and it also can scale with items like Manamune or Archangel Staff. However, M2 items are not great at the moment. That's why Mana Flow Band is not really in a good spot at the moment. But if them 2 items were in a good spot, then Mana Flow Band can actually get higher up in the tier. But that's pretty much the only time that you want to use Mana Flow Band. There are some champions that can maybe help with the extra mana, but again, we have Boots of Mana in the game. Boots of Mana gives us mana regeneration, so what's the point of having extra mana? We already have Boots of Mana. Pretty much every mage goes Crown of Shattered Queen anyway, which also gives you mana. So yeah, this rune doesn't really get taken. Pathfinder can be good. I think it's pretty good for roaming. If you like roaming around the map, especially on supports, or maybe on someone like Nunu, even junglers in general. If you like roaming around the map, if you like to gank a lot, then Pathfinder can be good. But I think in general, there are better runes to go for. But in general, it's pretty good. And you can also regenerate lost health or lost mana. Demolish, really good if you can get a lane advantage, whether in the mid lane or the Baron lane. It's really good for champions that can take towers very quickly as well. Champions that have high attack damage, and champions that can do a lot of damage to towers. I'm thinking of Sion, I'm thinking of Garen, probably the 2 best that you can go for. Again, you can get early tower platings, which can give you an advantage in the game. Nimbus Cloak, when you cast a summoner spell, you gain a bit of movement speed. It's okay, it's pretty good. Again, really good if you can use like Ghost on top of it as well, because the movement speed with Nimbus Cloak can go on top of Ghost, so you can get some crazy movement speed. But even so, when you flash away, you get a bit of movement speed, or even if you flash forward, you get that short burst of movement speed to help you engage. And then the C tier, no one uses these 2 runes at all. Both of these runes are terrible. Item crafting is just way too slow. You're never going to be buying an item anyway. I'm pretty sure it's not 5 bonus gold. I'm pretty sure this is 50 bonus gold. I think this needs to be changed. I just need to probably check it in game to make sure I can update it. But yeah, item crafting, not that great. You should never use this anyway. And the same with futures market as well. Again, the scaling is not really there. You go into debt. The problem is you go into debt, but you're still the same amount of gold anyway, if that makes sense. Like, you going into debt still means you need to earn the same amount of gold to buy an item. It doesn't actually mean that you're in a good spot, you know. And to be fair, if you compare this, right, 145 plus 7 per minute in terms of credit, you can farm Sweet Tooth and IXTALI SEEDJAR so much quicker and get so much gold from this combo rather than using futures market. So you're farming gold from Sweet Tooth and IXTALI SEEDJAR, and then futures market is just, hey, you go into depth. Like, you go into debt. I'd much rather use SEEDJAR and Sweet Tooth, basically. Precision tree. I mean, all so many of these runes are incredibly powerful. I mean, if I could move them all into S tier. It's absolutely crazy. So many of these runes are so strong. There's only probably 2 runes that are kind of weak, which is Triumph and Last Stand. Other than that, all the rest of the runes are really, really powerful. I really, really like them. Whether you go for Legend Bloodline or Legend Alacrity, both of these are good. It just depends on the champion that you play, the situation that you're in as well. If you're building more attack speed, then you can go for Legend Bloodline for the Omnivamp. It will help you a lot with healing. However, if you already have items like Bloodthirster, Gluttonous Greaves, Shield Bow, for example, then you can go for Legend Alacrity instead to get the extra attack speed. Again, you can get up to 20% extra attack speed from this rune alone, which is really, really good. I honestly think Coup de Grace is better than Giant Slayer. There are some scenarios which Giant Slayer is still really good. Giant Slayer obviously receiving nerf in the most recent patch. You don't deal as much bonus damage, and the enemies need to build more health for you to get that bonus damage up to that point. But Coup de Grace, when enemies are below 40% health, then you can deal bonus adaptive damage. This will help you during the early game, the mid game, and the late game. Help you at all stages of the game. Whereas Giant Slayer, it's only really beneficial if the enemy champions build health, which again, it really depends on what champions you're up against. You know, if you know that you're against champions that are building a lot of health, change into Giant Slayer. I mean, it's not that Giant Slayer is bad. Giant Slayer is still incredibly powerful to go, and it's still really good to go. To be fair, I can probably move Giant Slayer up to S tier as well. But it's just that you have to look at this. Like, you have to do the enemy champions, if they build 1,600 bonus health, which is quite a lot, by the way. If you think of like Warmogs is 700, so they need to build two and a bit Warmogs worth of health to actually get the full 16% bonus damage. But obviously 16% is higher than 8%. So if they build 800 bonus health, you're actually getting more value from Giant Slayer than what you are from Coup de Grace. But again, 800 bonus health again is quite a lot. So if you're against any tanks that build a lot of health, then Giant Slayer is definitely the way to go. I also should definitely move this up to S tier. Legend Tenacity is a good option if you don't feel like you need the healing or need the attack speed, but I think 99% of the time you are going to be going for either Legend Bloodline or Legend Alacrity, but Legend Tenacity is also good if you're against a lot of crowd control. Brutal, used on every single AD carry in the game, any single range marksman, any sort of range champion in general that deals AD damage and deals auto attack damage, you'll always be going for Brutal. The extra bonus damage that you get from your auto attacks is just a no-brainer and just helps you win early game trades. Gathering Storm, a bit on the weaker side, but if you don't have any other options, the problem is with the precision tree is that you have Brutal, Gathering Storm, and Triumph all in the same tier. Triumph is basically not pickable at the moment. You just don't really want to take this rune at all. Brutal sometimes is not good in the jungle, so you actually see Gathering Storm quite a lot on AD junglers or AP junglers, because it just helps you scale into the mid and late game a bit easier. I can think of champions like Kha'Zix, even champions like Xin Zhao, for example. You can go for Gathering Storm, again, because the Domination tree is fairly weak, so you're kind of stuck on the precision tree. Obviously, Inspiration is not that great in the jungle, but Gathering Storm just helps you get that bit of extra AD or AP later on. Last Stand, I'm trying to think of champions that Last Stand really works on. I can only think of one, which is Dr. Mundo, which obviously you're going to be low on HP anyway, and you're going to be dealing more damage when you're low on HP. Obviously, your healing will help you heal back up to full, but in general, you just don't get that much bonus damage. And Triumph, if you can one-shot someone, if you can do a lot of damage, then Triumph can be great. Yeah, it's just not that great overall. It's just not that great, unfortunately. Then Resolve Tree, again, another very strong tree to go for. You can actually go for Resolve Tree in jungle if you don't want to go for Precision Tree. There are actually some pretty good runes in the Resolve Tree that you can go for. Best Resolve Tree rune by far is Second Wind. Any melee champion that you play in any lane at all, you need to take Second Wind. It's a no-brainer. The effect gets doubled for melee champions. If, again, I'll take this as another example. But if you're playing a melee champion in mid lane, you're against a ranged champion. If you get poked, you quickly step out of combat. You heal a bunch from Second Wind, and you can go back into combat. But even if you're against like a melee versus melee in the Baron lane, again, Second Wind is a no-brainer. If you're going in for a quick trade, say you're playing, I don't know, Darius against Camille, for example, you get a bit of poke damage from Camille's second ability, and maybe you get caught by a few auto attacks. That's completely fine. You just walk away, you heal from Second Wind, and you can go back into lane, and you can heal back up. And I think people would be surprised how quickly you can actually heal back up from Second Winds. Nullifying Orb, probably the best one in the first tree, first row actually, in the Resolve tree. You've been able to get a shield when you drop low on health is just a really solid rune overall. Overgrowth is the last row in the tree, whether you're in the jungle, whether you're in the bound lane as a tank, or whether you're as a support as a tank. Overgrowth is really good because you're gaining maximum health over time, and also when you get up to a certain amount, you gain 3% of your maximum health as bonus health as well. So you just get a lot of bonus health overall, whether you're again farming through the jungle, whether you're in the bound lane as a tank or in the support role. Overall, it's a great rune. Bone plating is still good if you don't want to go for second wind. Bone plating is still good if you're against a lot of assassins or a lot of champions that like to do a lot of quick damage that maybe don't have a lot of poke. I'm thinking of champions like Teemo, for example, maybe. I mean, Teemo is obviously still going to poke a lot, which means second wind is going to be really good. But also sometimes Teemo walks up, does a few quick auto attacks in an instance with his first ability as well. And then bone plating will just help you reduce the damage. But overall, it's pretty okay, but second wind is just a lot better. And perseverance, if you need any tenacity, perseverance is great. You gain tenacity straight at the start of the game. And when you do get crowd controlled, you gain bonus armor and bonus match resist. So that's great. Courage of Colossus, if you do have a lot of crowd control, is actually pretty beneficial. I'm thinking of champions like Alistar or Ornn, for example, or Maokai as well. Any sort of easy crowd control abilities that you have that you can hit that doesn't get dodged at all by any enemy champions. Obviously, Ornn can be dodged, but it's very difficult to dodge it because he has so much knockups and crowd control. You gain a bit of a shield, and obviously the shield scales with maximum health as well, which means that this is more beneficial for tanks. Fun to Life is pretty good for supports. Helps you a lot with healing during the laning phase. Obviously, you can proc it yourself as well. It's not that good to actually proc it yourself because you don't get as much value from it. You can see the self heal at the bottom. It's not as big as the team heal. So that's why it's normally good when you play in the dual lane. If you're playing support, normally a ranged support, if you can poke enemy champions down, you can play someone like Lulu, for example. You can go Fun to Life in the first tree, Bone Plating in the second tree, and something like Revitalize in the third tree. And then Fun to Life, you can walk up, you can poke, and if enemy champions, if your allied champion also pokes that same champion, you could both get a bit of extra healing. And also it scales with ability power, which means it's quite good on AP champions. Revitalize, it's pretty okay, to be fair. I mean, if you have champions that are going to be healing and shielding a lot, Janna, Soraka, maybe not as much with Lulu, but obviously Soraka, you're healing a lot. Milio is also pretty good as well because you have healing and shielding. Then Revitalize can be pretty good, but in general it's not really a great rune. You can probably go for like Overgrowth instead and go for more tankiness in the same tree, but overall it's pretty decent. Onslaught, in my opinion, is just weaker than Perseverance. I mean, you gain more tenacity over time, but with this you gain also armor and mag resist, but this is more scaling and yeah, number of surviving enemy champions nearby. I mean, the problem with Onslaught as well is that you actually need to be really, really close to be able to get multiple stacks with Onslaught. So most of the time you're actually only getting 5% with Onslaught, which is pretty bad. So that's why Perseverance is so much better. And Loyalty, I don't know why this rune is still in the game. I'm glad that they removed IXTALI SEEDJAR because that was one of the worst items and it's actually a pretty good rune. The next job now is to remove Loyalty completely from the game and just get another rune in the resolve tree. This rune is just awful. It's terrible. It does absolutely nothing. And yeah, you just never want to take this rune, basically. That is everything. I'm a lot quicker than the item tier list. Obviously, there's not as many runes to go through as there are items. But overall, as I mentioned, you know, runes in general are very situational depending on what champions you're playing, depending on what champions you are up against. But I like to do these type of videos at the start of every big patch anyway, so then you can kind of get a rundown of what I think of the runes and what my opinions are and what I think should be changed and maybe should not be changed. But yeah, I appreciate you all tuning in. Thank you all for watching the tier list. I'll be back in tomorrow for more Wild Rift gameplay. Until then, stay safe and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.